The common thread that we all have in this room is that we're in the business of changing the world, right? So it is an honor to be able to host this event that brings together nonprofit leaders in the city, and for some of, for those of our past participants who are outside of the city in Greece, Afghanistan, Canada, who are not able to be here. They're here in spirit, so we hope to connect with them in different ways through this nonprofit leadership network that we have. So tonight, our panel is Bridging the American Divide. And when we think about that term, when I first heard it, I was like, wow, that's something that nonprofits do every day. We bridge divides every day in the work that we do. And it's really a great pleasure to have these three individuals here this evening to kind of help us think through what that means for our work and at this time in our country. So let me introduce you to Bruce Usher, Columbia Business Professor and co-director of the Columbia University Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. So before joining Columbia, Professor Usher worked on greenhouse gas emission reduction projects in developing countries. He also did some financial work in New York City and Tokyo. But today he continues his advocacy for the environment as an active investor and advisor to entrepreneurial ventures focused on climate change and clean energy. So if you're curious about that, check out usherworks.com and you can learn more about that. Bruce is also a board member of a number of organizations. I don't have them listed here, but it includes the United Nations Fund for International Partnerships, and Bruce is also the chair of the Tamer Fund for Social Ventures. When he's not doing all that, he does teach some classes at Columbia Business School. Bruce's courses focus on the intersection of finance and social and environmental issues. And I think he must be pretty good at it because in his bio, he's got some awards for teaching excellence as well as scholarship in the classroom. So thank you for being here, Bruce. At the very end here, we have a freshly minted Columbia Business School graduate, class of 2019. This is Dan Tonkovich. Dan has some experience as a management consultant. He did that for 5 years before attending Columbia Business School, and now he is in New York City and is continuing a career in private equity and venture capital. Before graduating from Columbia Business School 3 weeks ago? Yeah, very recently, Dan had the opportunity to be a student in the second iteration of the Bridging the American Divide course. So thank you for being here. We're really excited to hear the student perspective on that course. Now, our third panelist you may be familiar with. Did I turn this off? No. Okay. Angie Kammath. Some of you may know her because she has been a long-time force in the nonprofit sector, particularly in building pathways to economic mobility for low-income New Yorkers through partnerships between communities, business, and education. Formerly the executive director of both Streetwise and Perscolas, Angie is currently the University Dean for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at CUNY. But there's more. For those of you who don't know, CUNY is the largest urban public university in the nation. So it serves about 270,000 degree students, has over 250,000 enrollments in continuing education. And if you don't know, continuing education is code for working adults, usually with families, who are trying to bridge the skills gap. Angie's experience in bridging the divide includes placing over 500 individuals each year in middle skills jobs in the IT field through her work at Perscolas, serving over 100,000 New Yorkers each year during the Bloomberg administration, as Deputy Commissioner at New York City's Department of Small Business Services, and now overseeing grant-funded workforce development programs at the City University of New York. Thank you so much for being here, Angie. So what I want to do is we're going to engage in a conversation tonight, right? I'm going to pose some questions to our panelists and then have a chat together with the three of them, but then I really want to open it up to everyone in the room. That's your cue, SLP past participants, to have your questions ready, right? We will be passing around the mic so that we can have this conversation together. So we'll start with Bruce. Given that this panel, the title of the panel is Bridging the American Divide, and it happens to be the title of a course that you and Ray created, as Matt shared, can you share a little bit about how the course got started, what the impetus was, what pieces you wanted to really include in the course and why?
So this course begins with Ray. Like a lot of things in this room probably began with Ray. And 2 years ago, just around the time of the 2016 election, Ray was speaking to an event of about 300 students at the business school. And he said something that was, in hindsight, incredibly insightful, which was, he said to the room, you are very comfortable traveling to pretty much every major city in the world. You go to Tokyo, you go to London, you know people there, you're comfortable there, you have a lot of experience there. Hardly anybody in this room travels within the US between the coasts. You don't have any experience. And if you're from those areas, most of you have left. You don't know what's really going on in this country. And what he said in an offhanded way was, I think maybe you should be traveling to these places. So after that talk, I had the chance to sit down with Ray, and I said, Ray, we should do that. We should really do that. You're absolutely right. And so we did. And the first year, Ray and I put together this course. And the objective of the course is honestly really simple. The objective is for our students to gain empathy around the lives of people living in much of this country of which they really don't have much awareness, to be perfectly honest. Many of our faculty don't either, including myself. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is the course has two components. The first component is a typical course. It's 6 weeks of lectures, cases, discussions. But the topics we cover are topics that are relevant to this particular issue, that intersect with business school. So for example, we cover the topic of globalization. Our students are aware of globalization, globalized business. Of course, they study that. But what are the impacts of globalization on the country? What are the impacts on communities where globalization has reduced industries, or in some cases eliminated entire industries, entire one-industry towns? What are the impacts on those regions? And why did that happen? What were the underlying forces that created that situation? So we have 6 weeks of this, many different topics around those areas, issues of automation, issues of immigration, and the like. Issues that frankly are pretty contentious at the moment, that polarized in the country, but are also very relevant to business in America today. And the second part of the course is a 4-day trip to Youngstown, Ohio. Should I address why Youngstown? I don't want to take up too much time. So just in a few seconds, so why do we go to Youngstown, Ohio? Some of you may know Youngstown is really, in some cases, some ways emblematic of what's happened in many of these cities. This is a town that up until the 1970s had about 250,000 people. It was one of the 3 major steel producing towns in America, extremely successful, a very powerful union town, a very democratic city. 40 years later, it has been decimated. There's one small steel factory left, one mini mill, which by the way is owned by a French company. There's only 70,000 people left, so it's full of empty houses. The economy is in terrible shape. It has a massive opioid crisis. It's really had a rough time. And politically, in 2012, President Obama won it by 25 points. 4 years later, it was basically a dead heat. The Mahoning Valley, where it lies, a dead heat. It swung 25 points in 4 years. And so there are a lot of issues. There's also a lot of hope there too, interestingly enough. There's an extremely strong community. There's some fascinating, very strong nonprofits, small, but doing some terrifically good work, and some really interesting things going on the ground. And so those trade-offs, those tensions, those challenges are why we picked Youngstown, Ohio, and where we spend time there. And we spend time there meeting with business leaders, small business, large business, unions. We meet with nonprofits, of course, city leaders, politicians, everyone in town. Let me stop there.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm curious to know, what was the hope that you and Ray had in terms of what students would gain after experiencing a course like that? I know that you mentioned empathy and possibly learning more about what happens to a community when business makes certain decisions. But was there something that occurred over the course of the class and the experience that was surprising, that you were like, oh, that's
so most of the students, I think, go through an arc that begins with, I think one way, and a large number of other people in this country think differently. And a lot of it starts from a political place. I vote one way, they vote a different way. And the experience of the course is to basically understand, through this experience and gaining empathy, as to why people not just vote differently, but appear to think differently. And the short answer is, in this country, we pretty much all care about the same things, by and large. But we prioritize differently. And we prioritize differently because of our circumstances. And so what the students start to see is, wow, if I was in that same situation, if I was in Youngstown for the last 30 or 40 years and watched the decline of that once great city, I'd have different priorities too than I do as a Columbia Business School student living here. So I may have same concerns, but I'm going to prioritize them very differently.
So Dan, what did you gain from taking the course? Could you please check Professor Usher's comments?
Exactly. Fortunately, I've got the degree, so I don't have to worry about the grade from the comments. So in order to talk about, I think, what I gained, you got to first kind of look at why I applied. I did not have a nonprofit background or experience, which one might assume would be the typical person that might be drawn towards a course like this, or somebody who's public policy oriented. And my bio is not that way. Although, you dig a little bit deeper, and kind of twofold of why I applied. And one was, growing up, I was fortunate to be exposed to many of these issues at an intimate level, just from having a father involved in politics at the local and the state level back in Washington State. And he would always tell me a quote, which I didn't really appreciate until later on, undergrad, working, Columbia Business School, and this course. And it was a quote by Tip O'Neill, if anybody's a political junkie like myself here. But Speaker of the House in the US back in the 1980s, and it's all politics is local. And when you're 8 years old or 10 years old and your dad's telling you this, you roll your eyes. But I did, it really is true. And that is, no matter how national or international issues may seem, technological advancement, globalization, trade, immigration, the problems and the solutions so often are realized at the local level, and it influences people's day-to-day life, and understandably so, that influences how they vote. It's what they experience on a daily basis. And that's something where you really realize that even more when you go to a place like Youngstown, Ohio, and you have your boots on the ground, and you realize why they would make specific voting decisions based upon the circumstances that they're at and their daily experiences. And because so often these issues are at a local level and experienced at a local level, very often it's the local governments, it's the nonprofits, and it's the local businesses that oftentimes are forced to respond to this. The government at the federal level might allocate the funds, but the actual true response is at the localized level. And the success of that response can either be a real benefit to a community or cause divides. And some communities are better than others in terms of how they respond to that and how they improve the situations and outcomes for others. So when you get to a place like Youngstown, like I mentioned, and you get to that localized level, it is a fantastic case study in leadership, governance, corporate social responsibility, empathy, etc. And then kind of the second reason of applying is being a management consultant for 5 years. I was dealing with the implementation of a lot of these national issues, especially workforce rationalization, which is a polite way of saying laying people off. And the economics make sense. There's no doubt about that when you go and make certain workforce decisions. But you really don't see the impact of that, right? You make a recommendation, you leave, you're on your next flight. And so getting to a place like Youngstown, where you actually have had significant workforce reduction, whether it's steel plants, the automotive industry. I mean, we toured a GM factory in Lordstown, which they were down to one shift, and then a couple weeks later, closed the factory down entirely. And so you really start to realize kind of the impacts and how a lot of these decisions impact people on a day-to-day basis. So that kind of is why I applied for the course. And in terms of the learning outcomes, it really was the development of empathy, the validation that all politics really is local. And it really does kind of humanize certain business decisions that, decisions that are made at the enterprise, the national, the international level have immediate and, in some cases, generational impacts for individuals and their communities. And so, when you get to experience that and see it firsthand, when you go into a position, whether it's leading an organization, going into management consulting, et cetera, you start to really think about the social ramifications of your decisions and what you're recommending. So often what might look good on paper or be academically sound may not necessarily be the most dignified or appropriate response.
Thanks. It's good to know that a course like this is at the business school, because knowing that you're going into private equity and venture capital, which I don't exactly know what that is, so we might have to ask you a question about that. But to know that a course like this would influence how you will make decisions, how you will make business decisions, and to know that students who have taken the course sort of have a lens of thinking through their business decisions and its impact on the community is something fairly uplifting. Is that a common experience with your peers who completed the course?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is absolutely. Then there's also the aspect of students just realizing the importance of having a candid discussion with individuals and the value that comes out of that. There's so much editorialization, generalization, and opinionization that happens in the national news media, which especially at a place like Columbia Business School, is heavily consumed by the student population. And it's very easy to read those things, and yeah, it makes, like I mentioned earlier, it makes economic sense. But you go down and you have a candid conversation with individuals, and you realize that the level of commonality. And once you realize that level of commonality and that degree of relatability, it ends up being very productive. You really see the dignity in others, the dignity that's in all people, and how, while you might not necessarily agree with their view or decision, you realize why they're making decisions. And at the end of the day, they're making decisions to hopefully improve the quality of life on a day-to-day basis. So the experience is I think the same across the board, but at a very minimum, it's especially with going to a place like Youngstown and being there for 4 days in a very immersive experience. It's the importance of having a conversation and really having a people-to-people experience.
Thank you so much. Bruce, something you mentioned around that the fact that we all care about the same thing, and that what differentiates us is sometimes how we prioritize those things that we care about. Really, resonated with me. And Angie, I'm wondering, in your work with New York City nonprofits, businesses, and communities, how are you seeing the divide and the bridging work happen here?
Thanks, Lon. So it's great being here at the Lotus Club. I am a lover of books, and when I think back to kind of 2000, when I got into this area of workforce development, 2 books really influenced my decision. The one part of my bio that you didn't read was I started out my career in finance. I knew it wasn't for me, and so I went to grad school, and the 2 books that really influenced my decision in terms of what to do with my life were Nickel and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. It really kind of set me on this path of workforce development and thinking about people and how you can have folks who are doing all the right things and yet not get ahead. And then the other book was Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, and just the whole notion that probably every single person in this room has benefited from 1 to 10 jobs and opportunities from your network. And just the fact that the fabric of how we think about social capital and networking has just fundamentally changed. And so those are the kind of 2 books that continue to this day to be kind of a bit of my North Star in terms of till we solve those problems, I think we will continue to have divides. And I think the answer to solving so much of the divide that I see here in New York in kind of my variety of roles in community organizations and government, at our public higher ed institution, is around trust building, social capital building, and how folks who are doing all the right things still cannot get ahead if they're not connected in a better way. And so what makes me really hopeful about the divide is across basically every high growth and durable sector in New York, so healthcare, finance, tech, education, government, you see employers who are thinking differently and reframing the problem of where they find talent, i.e. going across and kind of building this bridge to find talent in different ways and to think differently about how they find talent. I also then just get terrified at the notion of how a lot of more traditional recruiters are still just putting blinders on in terms of just ignoring the divide. Because you can ignore the divide. I mean, just a mile and a half away from here, we have very deep poverty in this city, but one could go through a whole existence in New York and not at all pay attention to that. And so I think being really intentional about why we do the things that why employers do and make the decisions and choose to bridge the divide is a really important theme to my work. And so whether it's in working with tech firms, where purely if tech firms hired every single tech graduate coming out of our universities, there would still be a gap of like 3 million tech workers and tech jobs rather that aren't filled. And so we're seeing tech companies that are sort of saying, forget it, I can't keep going after the MIT, Stanford, Harvard computer science grads. I'm going to start working with CUNY. We'll see, just in the healthcare space, a huge graying out of the nursing population. And so we'll see, so many different employers just thinking differently about, maybe I could use someone with an associate degree. And so on and so forth. And so I think the trends, whether they're a lack of talent, a graying out of talent, just huge growth that there's not enough talent coming out, we're starting to see, I think, a lot of employers think differently and kind of by they're not calling it we're bridging the divide, but they're thinking differently about where they find talent. And I think that's really interesting. I think that if we don't do it, though, intentionally, we continue to frame the problem of where do I find talent that looks like the talent that I've always found, we're screwed. Sorry, there's a better way to say that, but we're in trouble. Sorry, that was the more polite way to say that.
Yeah, we had a brief conversation about groceries, Angie and I. There's a particular vegetable that I like to eat. They're called snow pea leaves. And where I live, the grocery stores don't have it, right? So I have to go to a very specific neighborhood in order to find grocery stores that have plenty, right? And we were talking about how that kind of reminds me of how we recruit depending on what you're looking for and what characteristics, what you need, you simply need to find the right community to go in and recruit for those specific attributes. So if you're looking for snow leaves, they're in Queens, Flushing, as well as in Chinatown. If you're looking for, a diverse IT workforce, CUNY has them in droves. So depending on what you're looking for, it's out there. You just have to kind of be able to connect to different aspects of maybe not your own social capital, but of a community's social capital in order to find it. Something that I think all three of you have mentioned is this idea of empathy and this idea of trust, right? So once we are in the divide and we're having conversations about how do we build this bridge, how do we build these steps to kind of connect these pieces, whether it's a skills gap, a communication gap, meeting working families where we need to meet them. Whatever that bridge is that everyone in this room is trying to build, after we've established that trust and empathy, what happens? What is our responsibility after that? So now we've gone to Youngstown. We've seen what the impact is. We visit communities in New York. We see what the impact is. We've talked to business partners. We've see what the potential is. What makes it difficult to actually build the bridge between empathy and action? And any of you can answer that.
Buy myself a minute or two?
Well, just to be clear, the action part's the hard part, right? The empathy and understanding is the easy part, though it turns out harder than a lot of people think. The course itself, we intentionally do not have an action component to it for the very simple reason. We don't want to go into community and say we have the answers. We think that's elitist and bound to fail and is completely saying the wrong message. That makes sense. At the end of the day, action is what ultimately matters. And I view it two ways. One, why do we teach this course in the business school? And we teach this course because you can't run a business in America today, a large business, and be unaware of these issues. You're bound to fail. Your employees, your customers, everyone's going to be concerned about that. And secondly, because business leaders have a responsibility. They fundamentally do to take action on these issues. How they decide to do that is really the challenge. They range from CSR initiatives, many of which I'm not a big fan of because I don't think they actually lead to change, to actually fundamental change in the communities they're working in and actually improving their workforces, improving job security, improving benefits, improving the things that make a difference, and understanding what their role is in those communities. But that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's hard.
I think to some of the really interesting examples of employers that kind of have reframed the question and started to work differently. And so when I worked at Perscolis, I think there's a book like Everything You Learn About Life You Learn in Kindergarten. And so I think the big rule that we had is just constantly asking why. And so when I was at Perscolis, was part of a team working with a company, a US-based company that did a lot of IT consulting. 80% of their workforce were outsourced, based in Asia. And we just started asking, and we had kind of one of our corporate partners who did a lot of outsourcing, but literally they were sick of flying to India to check on the workforce in Bangalore. And so they sort of said, why did we outsource everything? And you sort of track back to that origin story in about 1998, and at the time, folks just kind of, it was perceived to be cheaper, and I think folks were sort of saying, well, I either place something in Alabama or I place something in India, and it's just cheaper to do it. Turns out when you have the growth kind of globally, and you looked at 2015 wages, it was actually more expensive to outsource things in Asia. So we just kind of continued to start to ask, why? Why are you continuing to do that if you actually know, kind of dollars and cents, it's more expensive to do that? And the companies are like, great question. And at Perscolis, ended up working with a really large firm, and they essentially wanted to create an onshore development center, not an offshore development center, but an onshore development center, by just kind of really sort of saying, wow, we didn't know that talent could be here in the South Bronx. We didn't know that real estate in the South Bronx is $15 a square foot. We thought that that just doesn't exist in America, doesn't exist in New York City. But indeed, it does when you look in a different spot. And so I hold that up as an example. If you just sort of like really get to the why are you doing something the way, why are you kind of hiring from a particular place? Why do you think you need a particular degree? Why do you think you need to kind of only source talent from a particular place? If you have enough trust, if people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think we can really kind of break through many more. And so it was just really, I think, instructive to us to really think about why folks are outsourcing when there's so much talent here, what we could do to make the comfort level of the companies understand. At the end of the day, it's got to make economic sense. But if it's also the right thing to do, even that much easier. The other example that I'll give, Grand Central Tech, a big startup incubator accelerator in Midtown. We hear a lot of homage paid to we need a diverse workforce in tech to reflect the user base, but you don't see a lot of action around that. And so Matt Harrigan, the head and founder or co-founder of Grand Central Tech, said, I'm going to get all my intern talent from CUNY, no one else. The only way I can change the workforce is to start young and start the intern level. And he doesn't mandate that folks hire up interns full time. He just sort of says, that's how I'm going to change the face of technology for all of the portfolio companies in Grand Central Tech. I'm going to force every single intern to come from CUNY, because I can. And so I just think, it takes boldness for folks to either ask why or to kind of cut past the kind of easy things to say, like we should have more diverse workers in tech because it reflects, the better user base, and just do it. And I think that there's lots of heroes out there who just want to do the right thing, and they're damn smart, and they know it's going to make sense for the business. And those are not unicorns at all. I mean, in every sector across probably hundreds of companies, we see that in New York, and whether in the role at Perscolis or in government or at CUNY, lots of examples of that.
And then, quickly from a student perspective, if you operate under that kind of the presumption that Columbia Business School likes to have with their MBA candidates, and that is you'll be a future decision maker in some capacity in some organization. Of course, like bridging the American divide, or even broadly, what Columbia Business School does very well at is giving you a resource, kind of a toolbox of resources and exposure to the resources that are out there. There's some very intelligent people, at Columbia Business School, but they may have not been exposed to, community and technical colleges, apprenticeship programs, all the resources that are out there at the local level, and the value that they provide, and really the real potential that's out there. They're so often overlooked, and many of you guys in the room probably realize that with your organizations. I know they run the gambit of the sizes. But by and large, the nonprofits and the support services are small and lean operations. They're not out there, doing Instagram marketing, telling people about, hey, we're here as a resource. And so Columbia does a really good job with giving you kind of that immersion experience, to give you that toolbox of resources, to know what workforce development programs are, to know what a chamber of commerce is, to know what an economic development council is, and the true value that they can provide to you, and using them quite honestly as a resource, as an alternative to hiring a consultant. To be honest, there are so many people where the answer is, well, I don't know the answer, I'll hire a consultant. And me being a former consultant, that's very expensive to do, for answers that you sometimes can find yourself, and that are fantastic community-funded resources, CUNY being one of them.
Thank you so much. I got excited and time ran away with me. I'm sitting here chatting with the panel, but I do want to save some time just to hear from voices in the audience. If you have a question, by all means, raise your hand. The magical microphone fairy will come to you. And also, if you don't have a question, we would love to hear stories. Stories of what you're doing to kind of work with bridging the divides in your organization. And also stories around what are these divides that you're actually experiencing. So if you don't have questions, please share some stories. So.
Thanks so much. I have actually a question. I'm curious about the course. This is very loud. Do I have to speak into the mic? Okay. Where, if you considered also the divide between urban and rural, and not just about like post-industrial in terms of steel and auto, but about farming and the impact about farming communities, because I think after the election, one of the things that I was thinking about as a divide is urban and rural, and if we all got together, what could we learn about each other in terms of the issues that are important to us, and if that's part of the course or something you're considering.
So one of the first things we do in the course is we ask the students to tell us what divides they see in America. And you start writing those down, and it's a depressingly long list. You can pick any divides you want, religious divides and so on. Just to sort of draw that issue out. The reality is in a 6-week course and one trip, there's only so much we can cover. But this fall, we're doing the same course again, but we're doubling the size of it. 2 groups of students going through the course, and one group is going to Alabama, northern Alabama, Decatur, Alabama, which is a very different community from Youngstown, different challenges, different divides, different issues. So we are expanding. We have also had a discussion about going to a rural community, and Ray actually is from a town in a rural community, and we've talked a lot about that. Yeah, no, and it's something I'd love to do in the future.
I have the microphone. So, since I have the microphone, I'll make my comment. I've been working in Yonkers for the past 4 years, I guess, with the Grayston Foundation and Grayston Bakery, which has tried to bridge the divide by using open hiring as a practice of hiring entry-level bakery workers, manufacturing workers, with no interview, no resume, no background check, nothing. You know, you put your name down on a list. When a job opens up, you come in and you start working, and you go through a 6-month apprenticeship program. And for most of those people, they are, formerly incarcerated or, drug rehab people who couldn't get a job anywhere else. And so, in Yonkers, New York, by the way, has a lot of the same. It was similar to Youngstown in the sense that Otis Elevator was there for 100 years, and tens of thousands of people after the Civil War moved to Yonkers, New York. I didn't know any of this, but it's 6 miles away from here. Otis Elevator closed their plant there in the 40s. Everybody lost their job, and Yonkers declined into this, disaster, poverty, drugs, crime. And it's now, I guess the past 15, 20 years, it's been on the way up. And it's sort of an interesting urban renewal kind of case study because it's so close to New York, and it's just a fascinating city that I would encourage people to go visit. It's much closer than Youngstown. But open hiring is something that Grayston has been practicing for 35 years. It works for a number of reasons, but when we hire somebody like that, we also give them a tremendous amount of support. So we have a full-time social worker working in the bakery. We have a mentor for them, like a buddy system on the floor, because obviously it's the soft skills that are missing in these people. It's the work skills. And it's just there was a really interesting op-ed piece last week in the New York Times about how, millions of Americans are excluded from the workforce because they have a criminal record or because they made a mistake when they were 17 years old. They can't get jobs. And so I wish that more large companies, we're starting to proselytize and bring this message to American corporations, but it's a kind of a hard sell, as you can imagine.
Thanks. We'll take 1 or 2 more.
So the issue of sourcing talent and looking for where the talent dwells based on the skills rather than the package a person comes in, I think is really important. I'm with the Fortune Society, and we see about 7,000 people with records coming through our doors. And people tend to not notice the talent and just see the record. But we have our own needs for talent. and we can plumb that field that comes to us. But we just had a recent situation. We need a grant writer. I need somebody who writes really well, somebody with analytic skills, somebody with a really good work ethic, and somebody who's experienced in the world, and I need to be able to afford them, right? And so what I'm going to be doing, like, where does such a thing dwell? And I'm partial to lawyers because I am one, and they tend to be good grant writers. And I'm going to be hitting the local federal halfway house because I want a disbarred lawyer. And that person is going to have real gratitude because I'm opening the, right? Where does it dwell? And I'm doing the person a solid because they're working back into the workforce, and they're usually pretty bruised, and we're a safe and supportive place, and they'll help us raise the money that keeps our services going. So yeah, where do you find a disbarred lawyer? Federal halfway house.
Excellent strategy. Okay, last one. We'll just do one more.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. It's really exciting and interesting, and thank you so much, Ray and Matt and the entire team, for providing us all with not only the opportunity to network, but also to really just have these really important conversations. My name is Yvette Russell. I am the Chief Program Officer for an organization called Read Alliance. And so when you talk about workforce development, I actually work with high school students that we hire and train to become tutors to lower elementary students in reading. One of the challenges that we're facing, and where I'm interested in how it connects to the course that you're offering when you're talking about a bridge, is the fact that many of our high school students don't even have access to courses that would allow them the opportunity to attend an institution like Columbia University. And so from the very beginning, there are systemic and honestly racial historical practices that prevent them from being able to even be able to have a further conversation or be a graduate from a business program where they're able to explore what the rest of the country looks like. And so I'm curious to find out what and how and if you address anything around that type of divide, the racial divide, and really in workforce development, really when we're talking about starting from the very beginning, we have kindergarten students who are being expelled at exponential rates that are African American and Latino. So we're really setting up little kids to continue to be in a place where opportunity and access is just not present for them. And so just wanted to hear on a different level, like where that lies within your course.
Yeah, that's actually, it turns out to be a particularly interesting question, because the first year we did not address racism, and then Ray and I took the students to Youngstown. And on the surface of it, that isn't really a big issue in Youngstown. And then you start talking to people, which is what this is all about. And to be personally blunt, when you talk to white people living in Youngstown, they say there's no problem with racism. And when you talk to black people, they say there's a huge problem with racism, which tells you there's a huge problem. So last year, when we made some changes to the course, we decided, yes, we were going to just, when I say address this issue, we would raise the issue and discuss it with our students. And we had the great fortune of bringing in a guest speaker from Columbia, another professor who teaches at the university. One of the things is we have a lot of resources across Columbia. And he spoke on racism, and what he really talked about was the systemic challenges that you bring up. That it's not about people inherently being racist or not. I mean, that's, of course, can be an issue, but really about the systemic issues that are out there and why those barriers exist and how they really create a lot of the problems that the country faces today. I believe that was extremely informative for our students, and again, it raises the issues. It doesn't necessarily raise the solutions.
I think one thing I would add, and I think we'll talk probably maybe more about it in the reception, but in New York, we have such an incredible opportunity. So CUNY, public higher ed, we have 500,000 students between our credit and non-credit programs. 80% of our incoming class comes from New York City public schools. So if you know that, it's a unique system. Not anywhere else in the country do you have such a large public institution in the municipality where the pipeline is coming from, you exactly know where they're sitting in kindergarten. And so we have a real responsibility. And so something that I've been at CUNY now 2 years, but I'm equal parts doing meetups and exploration, internships, and all sorts of kind of work with and faculty to kind of do work for our students in the in our degree programs, but I'm spending a good chunk of my time working with New Vision schools, for example, just sort of saying, here's the roadmap that we have to get to middle schoolers so that they're not coming wondering about career exploration as a freshman, because college is a really expensive career exploration tool. There's a lot cheaper tools out there if you want to think about that. So it's not taking it all the way back to kindergarten, but I say to all of the change makers in this room, it's really instructive to kind of go to Youngstown, to go to Alabama, to go overseas, but it's really important to take that back home and think about what you could do in this affordable, accessible system called the New York City Public School System and the City University of New York, and think about change. When you think about the fact that we just produced 55,000 graduates in the past 2 weeks from our 25 schools, it's astounding. That's 55,000 amazing people ready for work, and what can we do to figure out where people dwell? And so I just think that, again, whether that takes the shape of hiring managers, thinking differently about where talent comes from, whether that's about capstone projects, whether that's about classes, whether that's about just kind of how we think about the problem, there's a boatload of easy within reach things that we can do here.
Yeah, it sounds like we have potential for Bridging American Divide courses in the city. Oh, yeah, so that sounds, and maybe with some of the organizations here. So I'm going to bring this to a close. I do have some announcements, but before I make the announcements, I just wanted to thank our panelists for coming here and sharing their impact tonight.